course, as a town council, we do not receive any funds from businesses, so we have to be very careful in any grants that we give to them, because they're not our primary responsibility. As she says, grants to businesses can be justified, and what I've been trying to do in this motion is to really build on the memo that we all received from the town clerk at the last town council meeting, which really did ask us to try and come up with some coherent policy. Now, I have to say that as a town council, I don't think we're particularly good at producing policies, whether coherent or not. I do feel that we tend to make day-to-day decisions more often than not. And I do know after the last elections, some new members expressing surprise that we didn't have maybe quite the policies in place that we should have. So what I put before you is an attempt to try and produce a policy on businesses. It may not be perfect. It may be that we want to read through it and decide that there are amendments that ought to be made, or that it requires further discussion. So I'm not being precious in trying to say, take it or leave it. If it is thought that the will of the council is that we ought to refer it back to the clerk for further work and to produce a paper to come to policy and finance, or that we should incorporate these ideas in a more overarching policy about grants and review the policy we make already. For example, most members here are new, but in the previous council we did decide to move away from the idea of having 2 or 3 dates, I can't remember which it was, during the course of the year where we considered grants, and we moved to a policy whereby we would accept grant applications at any policy and finance committee during the year. Now, I know that is causing concern to some members as to whether that actually is the best way forward. So if the council decides that they want to look at that and look at things in more broad detail, then I am quite happy at that. But I'm just trying to get the ball rolling. So what I put down here, and you've had, I think, an amended version, and the amendment has an extra paragraph in, which came from discussion with residents and business owners in the last couple of weeks. So I put it in at their request, is to try and set out a procedure. First of all, we need to decide, it could be that we decide that we will not award any grants at all, under any circumstances, to commercial enterprises. We haven't taken that decision. If we did, then the rest of paragraphs 2 to 10 would become redundant. But assuming that we do, I've gone on to look at it. We need to have some clear criteria. We need to have some success, some monitoring. We have recently put in place monitoring of grants. I think we need to probably tighten that up. We have awarded a number of grants in the past, so we've even had occasions where we had the same organisation apply the following year, and to be frank, we haven't actually double-checked that they have achieved what they said they were going to do with the previous year's grant. And I think that is not good practice, and I think we need to tighten that one up. I think we need to consider whether we actually are the most appropriate body to be awarding a grant. I'm not sure necessarily that we are. We tend to be the people that get approached first of all. And sometimes even when we are approached for a grant and another body has been approached, quite often the district council, we actually don't know when we award it whether that second grant application has been successful or not. And I think we need to tighten those sorts of procedures. The clerk suggested in the memo to us that we ought to make sure that what is being asked for is actually beneficial, so I put that paragraph in. I think for the sake of clarity it would be useful if we had a separate business grant and community grant subheading. I think it helps us to decide what we're doing, and I suggested that the grants to community events or community groups should be larger than those made to businesses. After all, at the end of the day, it is the individuals who make up those community groups or who run those community events who are paying our council tax. It is not the businesses. I think that we should expect that when businesses apply for a grant and we've decided that the criteria that we set are appropriate, that we should expect a contribution from them. And I've suggested a 50% contribution. I think that is fairly standard, and I think it's appropriate. We ought to remember that we're not just Burnham, we're also Highbridge, and in terms of rateable value, of course, most of our business rates come from Highbridge, most of the business rates that are provided to the other councils come from Highbridge. Most of our employment is in Highbridge. We tend to forget that, and I think therefore we should just be mindful, not asking for a specific proportion of grant to go to the two different towns, but just saying we ought to be mindful that there are two towns and there is a need in both of them. If we give a grant where it is something that is spent over a number of months or even years, then I think progress reports are appropriate. I suggested, for example, if we give a grant that lasts over the course of a year, maybe a quarterly progress report would be appropriate. I leave it to members. I think we really do need to raise the profile and the impact of our two chambers of commerce, or chambers of trade, whichever we like to call them. And so I think that it would be useful, just as in planning matters, the district council will have a number of, if you like, statutory consultees, that we should consider the two chambers to be statutory consultees when it comes to grants to businesses. We ought to ask for their opinion. We may not take their opinion, but I think we ought to have it. And finally, I've suggested that the additional one which came, which I added this afternoon, apologies for not having it earlier, that when we're looking at the two town centres, then the presumption should be that the grant is to a business, it is for business purposes, and we'd have to justify if it wasn't. And I've made the exception that Christmas lights, I think, is something that we all accept, and been going on for years, is actually, although it is very beneficial to the businesses, it is also, of course, beneficial to the people of Burnham and Highbridge. So I put that in, if you like, as an exception. So that's my rationale behind it. As I said, I'm very happy to see this as being the start of a debate, rather than necessarily the end of the debate. If, of course, you think I am the fount of all wisdom, and I'm quite happy to accept it as it stands, then I am quite happy to accept your opinion. But I don't expect you to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Was I respond? Thanks for Councillor Harvey for reminding me, as a person born in Highbridge, that's where the business is. Thank you very much for that one. I don't know if we're up for political point scoring tonight, but it sounds like it to me, Chair. Councillor Harvey did mention that members of this committee all received a memo for the town clerk. And if the councillor is polite, I would expect him to keep up to the last paragraph. And the town clerk says, the last paragraph, if you would like more discussion on this matter, please ask me, the town clerk, or the chairman of Policy and Finance to put it on the next agenda rather than come along and play the part of court jester. Another item, Chairman, we have our Burnham St Highbridge Town Council report. We turn to page 4, grants. It goes on to give details on how much we spent last year. There is also a new monitoring system ensuring that grants recipients return evidence of the grants spent. The applications will inform members of events of funding needed for any grant over £1,000 will require the presence of applicant at the meeting, which we've covered out for years. And then part of this was we are asking people to get grant funding for an update. Councillors cannot be expected themselves to go out and check projects that are built. They're all busy people, and as you know, we do this more as voluntarily. But that system is in place, but only to please Chairman, along with Town Clerk, who's discussed this with, and Councillor Harvey to come along and discuss this in the proper way as we suggested in the memo dated the 6th of this year, 1st to 6th this year, Chairman. Thank you.
Can I just come back to the point of information, Mr. Mayor? Councillor Facey should be aware, as he chairs the committee, that I gave my apologies for the last policy and finance committee because I was away on holiday. So therefore the route suggested in the memo wasn't actually available to me. It's sort of the next best way.
Received.
Yeah. That's right. I wasn't at the last policy and finance and knew I wouldn't be.
So I couldn't have actually brought it up, the policy of finance.
So that came in the post.
Because we had this before the last meeting.
Yeah, but we all get mail, Chair, for yourself.
They've passed.
I'm trying to get a little bit of view now back and forwards, but I will say there's quite a few points on here to come before a very vibrant council this evening. It would be my suggestion that members, including those absent, have time to have a look at this closely and make their comments in due form to policy and finance.
Thank you, Chair, no problem with that at all.
I had no problem with that.
And if it comes back to this council's recommendation from that committee, then it will be debated and voted on in due course. Councillor Force.
I think before we start splitting hairs and waffles and who was at the committees at the time, all of us after this committees at one time or another the commitments. I think we need to consider as a cross-party committee in policy and finance, you know, this criteria for how the grants are awarded to give everyone a fair playing field. I think an amendment to point 5, which has been discussed previously amongst councillors, of having 2 funding rounds, because I know previously having applied for grants for groups, usually there are two funding rounds, you know, to give everyone a fair crack, and to limit amount given to 2 different groups. We might also want to consider any extra circumstances. There might be meeting rooms which are for you could say for commercial use and will benefit a business, but may also be let out for community groups. So, you know, we might have to have a special consideration. I think all this needs to be discussed again at policy and finance. And I just think that that really we should be very careful and mindful how we're giving out these monies. It is limited, and you know, we might have given out a large proportion of the money, and somewhat further down the line there might be something very deserving that we then would have wished to support. So the 2 funding rounds amendment I'm proposing.
Thank you. Just in case my microphone's not working properly, I did say, I know that we've asked members to refer it back to policy and finance, which you sit on, I believe, Councillor Lawson, so perhaps that would be a good idea to bring it up in. Are there any other points, Councillor? Members are happy with us with that, and I would urge any member that's got any thoughts on this that doesn't sit on policy and finance to make thoughts known to the chair.